Hey, everybody, I am Cynthia Garrett, and welcome back to another session. A session that I have to tell you I'm super excited about, because joining me for today's session is a guy named Benjamin Nolot. And Benji is an American film producer, director, and writer from my home state of California. So please join me in welcoming to this session, Benjamin Nolot. Hey, Benji.
Hey, Cynthia.
How are you?
Good. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, listen, I'm a huge fan, you know that. And my son, just you guys who are watching, you always hear me speak about my son, Christian. And I always say that all the cool things in my life come through Christian. Well, this is one of those cool things.
He's my brother.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's awesome. You know, Benji, you got us when my son was in college because we watched Nefarious, Merchant of Souls, which was about sex trafficking. But how on earth did you even get led to make a film about sex trafficking?
Yeah, it's not something that I had planned out. It was really kind of a circuitous path how I stumbled onto that journey. And it was something where, starting out growing up in Southern California, I thought I was going to be a filmmaker, started off in films, but later really felt the call of God on my life and went into ministry. And it wasn't until I discovered the issue of human trafficking that I picked back up the camera and felt like I need to help tell this story of what's going on. There was very little awareness. Very few people knew what was going on or understood the dynamics of how this whole system of trafficking operated. And so that was kind of the catalyst. But even then, we thought, we're going to make a short video, 6-week trip, put it together, and just kind of get it out online. And but that 6-week trip turned into a 4-year journey across 4 continents, 19 countries, and 42 cities, documenting the phenomenon of global sex trafficking.
Jeez, I feel like this film has actually set the stage for your entire ministry now. Everything you do seems to relate back to these kinds of violations and honestly, and a real defense of women.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the way that the whole industry is constructed and composed, it's 98 or 99% women who are being sold and 98% men who are doing the buying. And so, yes, absolutely. On one level, this is a issue of gender inequality, and the whole issue of trafficking. This whole industry is one of the major forces of evil that is holding our planet hostage and holding women hostage in particular. And so, beyond having a daughter, a sister, 2 sisters actually, beyond having so many women that I care about in my life, just as a human being, I think, how can this be? We have to bring an end to this injustice.
I remember asking myself the same question that I think you did. I was reading actually an interview with you, and basically it was, what on earth could make a man want to buy a woman
Right.
or a child?
Right. That's one of the questions, when we started to see this issue on a global scale, and but in specific places all over the world, we really began to see this, how widespread this was. We started to ask that question of, what kind of society is producing so many men that are willing to buy a woman or child for sex? And because it wasn't just a one-off case here or there, a few bad apples, this is a global phenomenon that in Western civilized countries are seeing vast scores of men who are participating in renting women's bodies for their own sexual gratification without any regard for how that woman got there, how that child got there, and what the reality of their life is. And so this is in that sense, a very gendered issue. How do we understand our conception of what it means to be a man? And So those were big questions we started to ponder.
Well, that's kind of leads me into kind of some questions that I have, which are about your next film, the current film, which anybody watching, if you're interested, it's called Liberated, the New Sexual Revolution. That film is so shocking because like I sat there with my mouth on the floor because I was looking at where the millennial hookup culture is today, and this is where they're getting identity from. So it brings me to your question. So what does it mean in your journey? Talk to me about the journey of Liberated, and what do guys think? What do guys think it means to be a man today?
Yeah, I think that's such a huge and important question. So, thanks for asking that. It's perceptive because uh, really at the core of human trafficking is a culture of pornified culture, a hypersexualized culture, and a culture that has a very particular message to men and a story about men, about what it means to be a man. And so I think that for those of us who are trying to fight this evil of human trafficking, of sex trafficking, that is kind of the place that you need to go to see the roots, the context, the seedbed that all this is coming out of. And so in our journey of making Liberated, we began to look at those stories in the culture and discovered, that boys in our culture are being socialized through stories that tell them that to be a real man is to use women. And the more that you use, the more of a man that you are. And so they internalize those stories in the construction of their values, their worldview, and then they begin to act out those stories to try to gain approval among their male peers. So you see this performance of masculinity in our culture that is really at the expense of women. Yeah. And at the end of the day, men aren't really winning through this either. The more that men act out this performance, the more dissociated and divorced that they become from their true and authentic self. Because God has wired us for purpose, for meaning, for empathy, for love. And you really have to shut all of those things down. You have to numb those things and dissociate from those truer, more authentic aspects of who we are as humans in order to live out this performance of masculinity. But it's the only story on display in our culture today. So we hold up these icons of male existence, people like Hugh Hefner, people, like James Bond, these men, and I could go on and on and on to, more modern cases of that, the Dos Equis man, Dan Bilzerian. There's so many manifestations of that today, but it's all this model of masculinity that is built on being a user of women. And so I think that what we try to do in Liberated is to expose that toxic story and really to empower people to reclaim their identity. And to say that, we're not winning, we're not gaining, we're not being advanced as a species, we're not developing a higher level of consciousness through the adoption of these stories. It's actually robbing us from the inheritance of being a real, authentic human being. And so, yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a long answer, but I could go on and on. You push a couple of these buttons, and
no, I'm just gonna wind you up and let you go because I like when your buttons get pushed. So you talked about the whole male thing. Well, women. What does it mean to be a woman then? Because I was shocked at what Liberated actually spoke to me, but I want to hear it from you. Was it shocking to you, and what did you discover about young women's idea of what it means to be a woman?
Yeah, I did personally find it shocking. Some people may not, just depending on the level of their exposure to the culture. But I think the more important thing is to see the tragedy that is happening. So whether or not somebody finds this to be shocking, I think we should all realize the tragedy. Yeah. And the tragedy is the same for women as it is for men. There's a story about what it means to be a woman that is told in our culture today that socializes young girls as they're coming up into their adolescence And, a girl, 11, 12, 13, even younger today. I mean, there are books that have been written that show that socialization begins as early as 3 years old. But at some point, girls begin to look out at the culture around them and say, what does it mean to be a woman in this world? And, when you have this presentation of women and when the dominant image of women coming into the culture is this one narrow single story about the objectified, hypersexualized woman, that's really the only one given visibility, then they think, in order for me to be visible, in order for me to be empowered, in order for me to be a real woman, I've got to have this certain look. I've got to act in these certain ways. To bring this point home, I'll use this kind of anecdote. If you were to ask 100 girls, ages 11 to 13 years old, and you were to ask them to name the three female Supreme Court justices in the United States, how many of those girls do you think could name the three female Supreme Court justices? But if you ask those same 100 girls to name, three female pop culture icons, they would undoubtedly come up with names like Rihanna, Nicki Minaj, on and on. And so
Courtney, Kim, and Chloe.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so what that tells us is that the model for femininity in our culture is knit to these ideas of objectification, hypersexualization. And if you're 11, 12 years old, and you're trying to find yourself in the world, it's a very powerful thing. And so the pressure, these stories create a pressure on young women to conform to the idealized, hypersexualized image of what it means to be a woman. And it puts a pressure on men to consume. So, women, it's like the pressure is to conform, the pressure on men is to consume the women. And by doing that, to gain masculine validation. So these toxic stories form the seedbed of what we refer to as a pornographic culture, a culture in which women are cast as sexual objects, men are cast as sexual predators, sex is cast as a meaningless recreational act, and a confluence of those three things is producing a holocaust of sexual violation, predation, assault, on and on and on. And so, when the whole Me Too thing came out, it's like, this is not surprising that the vast majority of women in our society have experienced sexual violation. It is not surprising when you look at those dynamics.
I was just sitting here thinking about today's movements, right? And Me Too, Time's Up, and recently, actually, a couple months ago, I had a small dinner in a small group of people with the woman who started Me Too. And all Time's Up, all that stuff. I'm like, okay, this is going to be an interesting conversation. This is going to be an interesting group, right? So I end up at this dinner and we were able to ask questions or what have you. And I found myself sitting there listening to her talk about how first of all, she's a lobbyist in California in government. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, then why aren't you lobbying to change laws around pornography? So I asked her the question and she goes, well, I'm starting to get asked that a lot, but that's not really my lane. And I looked at her and I'm listening to these people, men who are really moved and women who are really moved. And yes, everyone feels like it's great that, she's helping to give this movement's giving women a voice and blah, blah, blah. But I sat there and I said, but you're a lobbyist. Like you don't see the connection between legalized porn and this. Like, to me, the legalized rights of men over women are the one end of a spectrum that ends all the way over in sex trafficking. And that was kind of something that you had referred to in Nefarious. Like, until we deal with that, we're not going to be dealing with this issue. No one is ever going to win. Women are always going to be sexually abused while we allow legalized porn, especially as women, to exist. So
I think
deal with that.
Well, I think a great example of this point is Sweden, because Sweden really put a big emphasis and a focus on the pandemic of sexual violence and violence in general against women. And they said, we want to solve this as a country. Why is this happening? And eventually where that journey took them was to look at prostitution. And they said, we're going to leave no stone unturned. And they spent 30 years researching prostitution before they passed what has become the most progressive piece of legislation dealing with the commercial sex industry in the world. And it was first called the Nordic model, is now called the equality model. It's a model of legislation that has eradicated sex trafficking from their country. And so to your point, the bigger issue here, is violence against women. The bigger issue here is sexual violence against women. And there's of course men and boys that are sexually violated as well. But to the point of violence against women, I mean, that is at pandemic levels. The leading cause of injury among women in the United States is men's violence against women. And so to really address that, you cannot leave any stone unturned. And of course, you have to look at the context and the demographic and the places where this is happening at such a high level. And so you look at the prostitution industry, the pornography level, the levels of violence are enormous. And so,
and spring break, which is what Liberated looks at, spring break.
Right. Absolutely. It's, these certain pockets where we have, created a truce, so to speak, with men's violence against women and said, we're going to be against it in all these other areas, but then we send women into these certain demographics where it becomes accepted, normalized, and acceptable to turn a blind eye to, as you discovered. And so I think that, we need a day of reckoning as a society to really become sober about violence against women, sexual violence against women, regardless of where it's happening, whether it's happening on a domestic front, whether it's happening in a workplace, whether it's happening in the porn industry, prostitution, or at a place like spring break. The fact that we have these certain areas that are sort of protected zones for men to assault and abuse women is, obviously it's not okay. And so that's what we're trying to sound the alarm on. That's what we're trying to blow the whistle on, so to speak.
That's what really struck me hard about Liberated, is that you look at, a bunch of college kids, they're going away on spring break. That should be a much different time than it actually really is today. And I was blown away by the fact that it's almost this protected little bubble of violence. And I remember you even put forth some information in the film, and I remembered the story about the girl, if you tell the story about the girl who was raped in broad daylight, standing there, I mean, on the beach amidst thousands of kids.
Right, you just can't even believe that this kind of thing goes on, and yet it happens year after year with thousands and thousands and thousands of college students in places in the United States and other countries as well. And so that was really, it was that discovery that was the catalyst for us to make a movie that was essentially on spring break and hookup culture and pop culture and all that. We were doing a much broader film. And yet when we were down there, we ran into a situation where there were girls who were being sexually violated. And we didn't discover that until the last day of our first trip down there. And we thought, is this part of the normal experience for women who go down to spring break? And so we decided to journey back the next year. And sure enough, we found that this was happening all the time in these certain party environments that were happening on the beach. And so over the course of 5 years of filming at spring break, I don't think we met a single woman who had not been sexually violated during her time there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It leads me to the question, Benji, like, I mean, what blame, I mean, look, what blame do women have in any of this? Because it makes me kind of think, well, look, I'm smart enough to know if something's dangerous, I'm not going to put myself in harm's way. Do we have any culpability as women?
I think that's not a book that I can write, so to speak. I will say that I feel that there's a powerful coercive element within the culture that is socializing women to adopt mindsets and behaviors to essentially become complicit against themselves, not realizing the destructive patterns of human thinking and behavior that they've bought into. And so I really view our culture as a system of female mind control programming. It's a system of brainwashing, and it socializes them into becoming accepting, these types of behaviors. And so yeah, I can't say that I would put blame on women. It's, especially, if you're a, let's say, a freshman going into college and you think, well, this is the thing to do, and nobody's really talking about, all anybody's talking about is, how fun this is. People watched it on MTV growing up in the 90s. They weren't told the story about, well, when you're down there, you're probably going to have your bikini top ripped off. If you get on somebody's shoulders to see the band better, they're probably going to chant at you to pressure you to take your clothes off. Groping, the chanting, the pressuring, the name calling, and then in the alcohol that fuels it. I mean, they're not told that side of the story. And so I think it's on us as a society, it's on us as adults to help inform young people about the realities of what is going on in these environments, and really to take a stand against them, and to create a no tolerance policy. We're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior anymore. And, in fact, that it's not cool to chant a girl down with, some of the chants that we heard were like, show your, I don't like graphic, but I mean, it's just chanting, pressuring, cajoling, coercing, manipulating until the girl does the thing. And, that's sexual violation.
Yeah.
And we have to reach a point of clarity and conviction where we say we're not going to isolate ourselves into whatever conservative bubble that we're in that allows us to feel protected, insulated from the realities of our world.
Yeah.
We have to get out of that box. And then B, where we say, we are going to be a voice to condemn this behavior wherever it exists, until we see deep systematic change happen, and women in our society can be free. There's this victim blaming mentality we have. Whenever a woman is sexually violated or raped, well, was she drinking? What was she wearing? What environment was she? It doesn't matter. My view is a woman could run fully inebriated down the middle of her college campus at midnight, completely naked, and that she should be totally safe.
She should be
you
safe.
You have no right as a man to assault that woman,
right,
for any reason. And the very fact that a woman's natural protector she grows up thinking is her greatest, her greatest fear is her natural protector, is a tragedy. Right. The fact that I will have to enroll my daughter in women's self-defense classes with a consciousness that, look out everywhere you go, look out when you're out at, a parking lot late at night, look out if you go. It's the fact that they should grow up with that. Do we understand how insane that is?
Right.
What is wrong with us as a society that we've just accepted this as normal? And so, yeah, I feel like we have a lot of work to do to redefine these roles of masculinity, femininity, the significance and value of sex, in order to stop the pandemic of sexual violence against women.
I am going to stop you there and ask you to join us next week, because this is all going toward a conversation about pornography and legalized porn. And I think instead of going a second further, if you're watching, I just want to leave you here this week, and I want to invite you back to join us for another part of this conversation with Benjamin Nolot, because I think it's so important for us to wake up and realize and do something about what's going on all around the world. I'm Cynthia Garrett. You've been watching The Sessions. I will see you next week.
Whelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. Oh, I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give your love away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless are a father. You are justice. You are righteous. You are a healer. You are a father. Yes, you are good. Oh, you are good.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Cynthia Garrett, and I hope you're enjoying the sessions. And I just wanted to drop in on you and remind you to pick up a copy of my book, Prodigal Daughter, A Journey Home to Identity. I wrote this book because I realized that we are all prodigal kids, you know, and there was a time in my life when I ran off looking for love in all the wrong places and ended up in a world of trouble. But I met my maker and I found my identity in that mess that God turned into a message. So you can go to cynthiagarrett.org and get information about how to get my book online and at booksellers everywhere. I promise it'll bless you.